It's the Security Weekly News, episode 105. More Microsoft attacks and more info on the Exchange server attack, a new Intel side channel attack, your Python may be poisoned, and the Department of Defense lets its guard down on contractors. Also, the Right Reverend Aaran Leyland joins us, and more on the Security Weekly News for the week of 7 March 2021.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week, your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. As technology continues to evolve and expand, so have the attackers that put our critical systems in jeopardy. Core Impact from Core Security is a penetration testing tool that safely finds vulnerabilities using the same techniques of adversaries, with certified exploits and wizards that guide you through critical pen tests while maximizing the time of advanced testers by automating their routines. With Core Security, you can safeguard your infrastructure by limiting access, detecting threats, testing for security weaknesses, and efficiently monitoring data. Visit securityweekly.com/core security.
All right, so the news. So the latest phishing target is, and this is all Microsoft stuff related, and I don't talk about phishing much anymore because it's so common, but I wanted to bring this one up. So the latest one is using reCaptcha on Microsoft users. So I mean, not that they couldn't use it somewhere else, but they were primarily targeting Microsoft Office 365 users. Now, I mean, I don't know about you, but I have heard from quite a few people lately that just call me or whatever about credential stuffing attacks on their Microsoft Office accounts. I've had, I don't know, quite 3 or 4 calls in the last week just from people saying, what does this mean? Why am I getting these notifications? Most of the people I knew had two-factor running. The ones that didn't actually did get compromised because they were getting credential stuffed. But this article basically reported that at least, according to research, at least 2,500 emails had been sent to senior employees in banking and IT over the last 3 months, which doesn't sound like that many, but is very focused. And the attack has a top-level domain, and it has a logo of your company. And then it redirects to a fake reCaptcha page, which, then does the usual pick which tiles have abstract expressionistic overtones and then ask you for your Office 365 credentials. The actual source email supposedly has a voicemail attached, and the attachment, of course, is when you click that, it says go to this reCaptcha to get your voicemail. It's still basic phishing, but it's really tempting. And there's a lot of Office 365 attacks currently going on across the spectrum. So you might want to advise all your people about having some extra care and being aware of some of these 365 kind of attacks. And speaking of Microsoft anyway, HAFNIUM, which is the Microsoft name for the APT that's been targeting them lately, reputedly, and they were reputedly affiliated with China. And this is all about the Exchange server attacks that we've talked about a whole lot. I mean, everybody talked about the Exchange server stuff last week. Microsoft patched it all in a special release, so hopefully by now you've patched your Exchange servers. Of course, those 0 days that they were talking about have been being exploited since last September, so, there's that. And I know we talked about it, but I just wanted to add this article which actually shows how to execute files being dropped using these 0 days, using web shells. So this is not really about the Exchange attack per se, but it's a very interesting article if you're interested in such attacks. So they actually use Lua, the REPL shell, to execute commands, and they show you how to do this with web browser-based delivery and server-side scripting. Very, very cool. I'm not going to go all the way through it here on the news, but the article is really nice. They have examples of all these types of attacks. And if you have been looking for something that explains all this because you're interested in these types of hacks, this has the source code. Check it out. According to 2 students and a professor at the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana, which all my life I called it Champaign-Urbana. I did. I mean, I've never heard anybody, but this article said Urbana-Champaign. And I was like, what? Is it And then I went and looked, and that's actually what it's called. So I don't know where Champaign-Urbana came from, but I have always heard people say Champaign-Urbana, and I just don't know exactly what might have happened there. But anyway, I'm going to presume the article's right. I looked it up, verified. Okay, so it could be evidence of the Matrix, though. So like all my life, it was here in Champaign-Urbana. Now I'm in this like alternate version that it's Urbana-Champaign. I mean, I really felt like I'd fallen through some kind of gateway. But anyway, we could spend all day talking about, is it Urbana-Champaign, Urbana-Champaign, Champaign-Urbana? I don't know. But anyway, we're going to let that go now. I have heard that it's pronounced Apple Jesus or something like that, but that's okay. Anyway, I don't know why I was thinking about all that. That was a weird morning when I was thinking about that story. But so this what they found anyway is a side channel attack related to Intel CPU Ring Interconnects. And if you don't know about Ring Interconnects are the sort of bus-like mechanisms that connect all the various CPU components to each other. So this is the interface between these various areas inside the CPU. So it's a way to manage that exchange. The research, which I'm not going to get into a lot of details here about, but the research is going to be presented at Usenix 21, which is in August, and the title of the paper is Lord of the Rings Side Channel Attacks on the CPU On-Chip Ring Interconnect Are Practical. So I was like, obviously marketing didn't title that article. But basically the explanation is that this attack that they came up with and demonstrated is monitoring latency when different processes access memory at the same time. So it was like, how long does it take? And there's delays there. If one process is taking the memory, there's a delay. And they did several experiments that use these delays and the latency as a means to allow an attacker to run unprivileged code on the victim machine. So it still has to be local. So it is laboratory sort of thing, but it's kind of interesting. So on Sunday, they released their code in a GitHub. So if you are interested in this and you want to read this article that explains more about what they did, there were several different articles out this week about them. I'd seen this in the Register, but there was an article, I think, on Threat Post or something. But I put a link in the wiki to the actual repository where they put all their source code out. So you can check that out if you are interested in such things. The General Accountancy Office, which is called the GAO in the United States, and they work for Congress. So the GAO is an auditing group that actually works for the Congress of the United States, and they often provide guidance to the Congress about things that are going on, about things that are inappropriate or whatever. They cover all kinds of different bases. But they released a report about the Department of Defense. And they found that the Department of Defense requirements for cybersecurity in weapons contracts are not providing sufficient controls to limit particularly supply chain cyber attacks. Apparently, despite the increased efforts by the DoD, a lot of their cybersecurity requirements are not applied to contractors. So the GAO basically said the majority of DoD weapon contracts do not include any cybersecurity requirements at all, none. The few that they found that did have requirements basically were very vague. They did not seem to have specific requirements other than just, it would be nice if you maybe like used a firewall or something. And so this was a little bit of concern. And it's not exactly clear how the things that they did find would be implemented or how it would impact the acceptance or rejection of the weapon system. So basically, welcome to Supply Chain Attacks 101. I mean, seriously, come on, guys. Poison Python packages procreate, proliferate, perambulate. I don't know, whatever. Alliteration is always fun. Darkly Dreaming Dexter. In fact, there's supposed to be a new season of Dexter coming. Python is under a little bit of fire. I don't really think it's Python's fault, and I don't think the article really presented it that way, but they're due to poison modules and poison packages, whatever you want to call it. Now, we've been talking about these kind of supply chain API problems for a long time, and certainly SolarWinds and other supply chain problems illustrated just what a threat APIs and uncontrolled APIs and APIs linking to other APIs, linking to other APIs, linking to other APIs could actually be. And then here's a case where you've got packages, and all of you who are programmers in whatever language you're programming in have probably by now at least at some point allowed modules to be added during execution of your code. I mean, we all do that, right? You need math, you add math. You need whatever, you add it. And I have to admit, I'm pretty lame about that. I've always been fairly trusting of those modules. I found a module or a package that I thought would be useful, and I embedded it. And I wasn't writing production code usually, so it didn't matter so much. And it's certainly not a shock then, I guess, as some Python modules and packages are poisoned. So Alex Burson claimed that he actually claimed $100,000 in bug bounties last year by pushing external software versions. So these were things he had put together himself into internal software packages, and a lot of those packages he illustrated were subsequently downloaded by Apple, PayPal, Microsoft, you name it, IBM. They were all in there, and then he went and claimed bug bounties against that to do that. And so the type of attack that this article is talking about is called package squatting. And it's pretty low end. It basically means you create a fake package with a nice name. Sound familiar? Voila! People download it. I mean, I remember this ancient virus when, I don't even know when this was, probably like in 1992 or something. And there was a file, it was an executable file, and it was named StarTrek.exe, and it was labeled Cool Star Trek Game. And people downloaded it, and when they downloaded it and ran the executable, well, it put malware on their systems. And then I'd gotten calls about it, and people were saying, how did I get this? I don't really know. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I've seen this before. So this is a crude sort of a supply chain attack, basically, but it really the same thing. Put up a package called All-in-One Toolkit and see if suckers download it. They illustrated one called Beautiful Soup 4, and after Apple Jesus, which is my next kid's name, so which will end up with, and I'm going to use that name next. So then I will have Rando, Apple Jesus, and Little Beautiful Soup 4. I mean, that's going to be my family. But anyway, I know I was a little weird today. It must be the weather or something like that. It was making all my cats act weird too. Our special guest today was asked to leave the monastery for being too holy. I mean, they just didn't know how to contain the glory that is our good friend Aaran Leyland, who is the CEO of Restricted Access, and he's coming to us from lovely old England, and is going to talk to us about supply chains today. Hi, Aaran. Uh-oh, I can't hear him. You're muted.
It's okay. Well, I'm not muted. I wouldn't double mute my microphone. I was thinking about that for the last 10 minutes, but anyway, we move along after your alliteration
Surprise!
and APIs. But yeah, it's all good. Okay, right. Doug's lighting up a cigar I seen in the corner of my eye, so I'll carry on.
You can go now.
Singapore Airlines, the latest victim of supply chain attack, as today's theme is very soundly around supply chain attacks. The major part of the report comes from Computer Weekly. A restricted set of data of over 580,000 frequent flyer members of Singapore Airlines was exposed in a supply chain attack against SITA's passenger service system. Obviously, this made me think about some recent big name examples of supply chain attacks: SolarWinds, Target, NotPetya, and my all-time favorite piece of code, Stuxnet. So, start with what a supply chain attack is. And I find a good explanation that a supply chain attack is a cyber attack that seeks to damage an organization by targeting less secure elements in the supply chain. And also, I'll further explain that a supply chain is a system of activities involved in handling, distributing, manufacturing, and processing goods to move resources from a vendor into the hands of the final consumer. Okay, so as we've seen in recent media articles, especially talked about by Dr. Dove, a supply chain attack can occur in any industry: financial, oil, shipping, or even government. Unsurprisingly, upon research, I find that a cyber supply chain attack is a broad term without a universally agreed upon definition. So I will start with the world I like to read about. That is the world of James Bond. This is the world where cyber criminals typically tamper with the manufacturing process of a product by installing a rootkit or hardware-based spying components. Depending on who you talk to, Huawei is often rightly or wrongly connected to this method, more China. In a world with less James Bond, supply chain attacks on information systems generally begin with an advanced persistent threat that determines a member of the supply network with the weakest cybersecurity to affect the target organization. This leads on to some honorable or dishonorable mentions. Obviously, Target, as we know, at the end of 2013, Target US retailer was hit by one of the largest data breaches in history of the retail industry. It is believed that cyber criminals infiltrated a third-party supplier to gain access to Target's main data network. It is often attributed that the attackers first broke into Target's network by stealing credentials from the provider of HVAC systems. Stuxnet, which was an attack mainly directed towards Iran's Natanz uranium enrichment facility. The attack was unexpected because classified military systems are not generally connected to outside networks. It was reported that the code was loaded onto a USB key or many USB keys that had been carefully set up and left in large numbers, possibly purchased from a local internet kiosk. Maybe a James Bond-type person was involved in this. And also, Countdown to Zero Day is a great book if you want to read further into this. But more recently, and still in the news daily, is SolarWinds. The 2020 global supply chain cyber attack is believed to have resulted through a supply chain attack targeting the IT infrastructure company, obviously called SolarWinds, which counts many federal institutions among its clients, including the business computers of the National Nuclear Security Administration, and Microsoft itself was affected. Microsoft is now working with FireEye to contain the ongoing cyber attack contained in supply chain software used by the government, consulting, technology, telecom, and mining entities. So, Computer Weekly reporting at Singapore Airlines has become the latest victim of a supply chain attack against the passenger service system of SITA, a supplier of IT systems for the airline industry. SIA, a Star Alliance member airline, provides a restricted set of frequent flyer program data to the alliance, which is then sent to other member airlines to reside in their respective passenger service systems. While SIA is not a customer of the SITA passenger service system, one of the Star Alliance members airlines is. Obviously, this exposes the frequent flyer program to all of the 26 members, including Singapore Airlines, obviously showing the possible reach of a supply chain attack. I also noted on this that the attribution is again to a highly sophisticated threat actor. This being just another on a long list of supply chain attacks that appear to be becoming more frequent. We have Sanjay Arora, Managing Director of APAC at Darktrace, and he says, complex global supply chains offer those with criminal intent many points of vulnerability that may be tested in pursuit of compromising systems. These attacks are virtually impossible to detect with standard security tools and procedures because the malicious software is packaged as legitimate within your laptop or software you have typically relied on and delivered into the heart of your organization by trusted suppliers. He goes on to state, and I agree, that this is why a growing number of companies today are adopting a zero trust policy. So, prevention. Researching this subject proved difficult, as if well executed, which is usually the modus operandi of an APT even, then it is tough to detect. In the UK, the NCSC has produced the Cyber Essentials Scheme, which trains firms for good practices to protect their supply chain and overall cybersecurity. In my opinion, Cyber Essentials is a good start, but it will not deter those with near infinite budgets and resources. I liked on my research what Steve Zalewski, the deputy CISO at Levi Strauss, had to say. So he said, at Levi Strauss, the company vets its software vendors. We require them to have demonstrable, audible proof that they have implemented a cybersecurity framework and can demonstrate compliance with that framework. He did say that they don't hold him to a specific framework, but he wants to see a commitment that they're willing to write down security controls and practice, and then he can check if they're compatible with theirs. One thing the data center should not do is stop deploying patches. So we always think about aggressive patching, and he goes on to say that their patch management process meant that the fixes to the SolarWinds software were installed before it hit the news, protecting the company against the attackers who might have wanted to jump on SolarWinds, but it would not have stopped them from being hacked in the SolarWinds. So, however, he admitted that it wouldn't be able to catch, as I said, the SolarWinds. FireEye and Microsoft also both missed it, so it is difficult and for the suspicious behavior to be seen. I agree with the way Levi are doing business, and where possible, organizations should consider imposing stringent controls on suppliers. And as I said, aggressive patching may not stop an ABT, but it will make sure you're not the next victim of a NotPetya style attack. We know that detection being better than having a cyber incident response team arrive at your door, but explain time and time again that detecting supply chain attacks is complex. This can be the proverbial needle in a haystack, sometimes made more complex by the possibility of valid code signing certificates that often accompany the malicious code. So Kaspersky has an answer. So they say use the best cybersecurity software, and they say it must be dedicated, proven, and they go on to say that rather than looking at signatures, it'll be, analyze anomalies, which is obviously good because signatures will only tell you what's happened before, and the analyzing anomalies should help you with what may happen in the future. They go on to say about hiring the right team and red teaming, and I suggest that you don't skimp on security, especially financially. So they also go on to say using threat modeling during software development. They state that during software development, companies must create a threat model for their deployment infrastructure and identify and eliminate risks in advance, going on about the principle of least privilege, which we should all take heed of. They go on to say carefully manage supplier relationships and build trust that goes beyond traditional assumptions. One that's close to my heart with working in cyber incident response, you should invest in response. Businesses must invest in response as well as protection. If you don't have internal capacity, involve a cyber incident response team. Okay, this is what Kaspersky said, but I felt we needed to go deeper. So at an enterprise level, we can look at regulatory frameworks. PCI DSS has been a robust one in my experience. And then there's also Capability Maturity Model, ISO 9001, Common Criteria, SOX 2, and also FIPS 140 accreditation. So we have, heading in the right direction, one organization working to address the issue, which is the Consortium for Information and Software Quality. Their special interest group under the Technology Standards Body, Object Management Group. One of the standards the organization is working on is the software equivalent of a bill of materials. It will let enterprise customers know the components that go into the software they're using, and if any of those components have known security problems, that should pick it up. I look forward to following their progress. So I suggest that you don't rely on a paperwork exercise with your suppliers, as MasterCard and Cynthia Institute say that the most common risk assessment methods are questionnaires used by 84% of companies and documentation reviews used by 69%. Although despite the popularity of these questionnaires, only 34% of risk professionals say they believe the vendor's responses. Finally, in my opinion, Kelly White, CEO and co-founder of Risk Recon, sums up the issue. In the wake of the SolarWinds attack in particular, organizations need to look at their software suppliers, particularly those with software that has privileged access to company assets. That includes expanding assessment criteria to include the integrity of the software development process. He says, to ensure that controls are sufficient to prevent introduction of malicious code, this is the time to double down on least privilege, White says. During his time as a CISO of a large financial institution, he says any software that required communication with the internet was limited in the web access permissions to only accessing predetermined update sites. Such a policy not only prevents software from communicating with malicious command and control servers, but also the benefit of raising alerts if it tries to do so. I like this very much. What are your thoughts, Dr. Doug?
I think I was going to add just 2 points. One of the points I would add is that don't just think that supply chain is one hop. If you're going to start imposing these things, that needs to be imposed all the way down the chain. So that means if your supplier is developing code, which is using code that was developed by another person, code that was developed by another in a chipset, then you definitely need to embed that in your strategizing. So how do we ensure that everybody in that chain, it's just like that DoD story, if DoD is compliant, but the supplier's not, the problem just remanifests itself. And the second one was something I was talking to somebody about this morning. And one of the things I had been thinking about was we almost need anti-espionage training for users, because you mentioned James Bond several times, and also being a big James Bond fan. But, I had to go to anti-espionage training when I worked for the government. And a lot of the stuff they told you sounds awfully familiar now. And I think we're seeing these large entities, backing APTs and giving them training in fieldcraft, just like they would have trained spies in the Cold War or whatever. And they're starting to train them to approach users and get information that way, because credential stuffing works. And if I can get you to let me sign in with your account while, you're in the other room making bellinis, I mean, that's what James Bond would have done, is he would have said, "Oh, darling, go next door and make me a martini." And while you're in the other room, jumps on your laptop and embeds the spyware. And we've seen that over and over again. So that's my 2 points about that, if that's okay.
Brilliant, thank you. No, I must admit, a few years ago when I was looking at the job market, there was a stand for Huawei, and so I went to have a talk with them, wondering sort of what they did in the UK. But it seems there was an organization separate to Huawei that was paid for by Huawei that actually looked through their software and their hardware to make sure that everything going into the UK market does not have any supply chain corruption on it. So
but that's tough.
Anything that we can add to that.
That's a good idea, but it's hard to do, too. When you start talking about chipsets and a massive amount of code that starts coming in, it really gets complicated. All right. Thank you, Aaron, for joining us once again. It's always a pleasure to have you here, and I enjoyed it. Finally, beneath the city, 2 hearts beat, soul engines running through a night so tender. Well, Alicia is listening to those hearts beating, too. And if you aren't afraid of Alicia, and, Alicia, we're out of bronchioles. I don't know where I made that word up. But can you order some more? Well, I don't like to say Alicia's real name because, if I do that, it causes weird problems sometimes. But anyway, according to the University of Washington, Alicia can actually pick out individual heartbeats and analyze them in the room. So you just thought Santa was a snoop, but Alicia actually does know exactly what you're up to over there in the dark. She knows. And she raises her virtual eyebrow in a withering disdain worthy of Jeff Mann. So the researchers found that they could use AI and sonar to pick up vibrations caused by, wait for it, I know what you're thinking, not those kind of vibrations, but it was caused by chest wall movements. So basically, Alicia emits a sound that you can't hear. That's why your dog's been howling, and then is able to distinguish the return as a heartbeat. Then they analyze the heartbeat patterns to determine, and that's what the purpose of this was, to determine how well your heart is functioning, or maybe what you're up to. I don't know. Anyway, pretty soon, Alicia won't need us anymore, and well, that's how you get Skynets and Blade Runners, and, you know. So, hey, Alicia, could you look away for just a few minutes? Thanks. Thank you to Aaran Leyland, and that's the news in a never-ending time of plague. I'm Doug White, and I'll see you next time.